Malay political discourse at the time yet. The other factor that they have in common with the early generation is how their own backgrounds, their own ethnic origins were equally mixed. Dr. Burhanuddin is Malay but of Minang background. Ibrahim Yaakob, Malay of Minang background. Ahmad Mustaman, Malay of Minang background again. So many of the pioneering members of the Kaum Muda movement on the west coast of the Malay Peninsula had direct family links across to Sumatra. And that's also the reason why the idea of them supporting Sukarno and the Indonesian nationalist movement seemed not unnatural for them, because for many of these Malay Muslim activists who were active in the west coast of Malaysia, they had common family links, particularly with Sumatra, to a lesser extent with Java, but particularly with Sumatra. So the idea of a common shared history and a common shared destiny was actually very strong in them. We see this in their writings. When we read the writings of Dr. Burhanuddin Femi, for example, he talks about the historical necessity of British Malaya and the Dutch East Indies being disbanded, and the return of these two polities into one large polity that transcended boundaries of race, ethnicity, bangsa dan suku-suku. And it's also very interesting to note that Dr. Burhanuddin Hilmi later on in the 30s would become the first leader of the Malay nationalist movement and then the Malay Nationalist Party, PKMM, Parti Kebangsaan Melayu Malaya. And after that, because of his both Islamist and leftist leanings, became the third president of today's Malaysian Islamic Party, PAS. Dr. Burhanuddin was the president of PAS from 1956 to 1969. He died rather young because he was taken under political detention and his health was fading at the time. And he died shortly after release from the Internal Security Act. During this period of 1956 to 1969, Dr. Burhanuddin articulated a vision of Islam that in so many ways corresponds to the earlier vision that was developed in the late 19th, earlier 20th century by people like Munshi Abdullah, Syed Sheikh al-Hadi, Syed Jalaluddin, which is an Islam that was modernist and progressive in the sense that it was directed towards national emancipation and social empowerment. He basically tried to translate Islam into a political project, but a political project that was non-sectarian. And this is the unique thing, because after his death, no Islamist leader in Malaysia has ever managed to reactivate the same sort of universalistic, pluralistic, inclusive vision of Islam that Dr. Burhanuddin had. So the Kaum Muda movement, if you like, ends in 1969 with his death. When I was writing the book about the history of the Malaysian Islamic Party, chapter 3 is actually about him. Very long chapter, but it's the chapter I enjoy reading and writing the most, because I have to read all his speeches. And it's just amazing when you read the official speeches and writings of Dr. Burhanuddin Hilmi in the 50s, when the Islamic Party of Malaysia was dubbed by the British colonial authorities as the Green Red Party, the Islamist Reds, Islamist communists. And the Malaysian Islamic Party was openly supportive of the Malaysian Communist Party that was banned at the time. They were openly supportive of the Malaysian workers' movements, the trade union movements. They supported the hartals, the boycotts that were aimed to bring down the colonial economy. And then when you read his yearly speeches, his addresses to the Malaysian Islamic Party, who are his heroes? The heroes are not Wahhabis from Saudi Arabia. His heroes are Gamal Nasir, Fidel Castro, and Sukarno. So that's the sort of Islam that was being promoted by Dr. Burhanuddin. When you read his speech, there's one speech where he says Sukarno is the Muslim leader of our time. Because, of course, now in retrospect, you look back and you see how Sukarno's image has been reconstructed post-65, post-70. But at that time, for a lot of the younger generation of Islamists in Malaysia, people like Gamal Nasir, who was a nationalist, Gamal Nasir's project of a united Arab state, uniting Egypt, Syria, and Sudan, or Sukarno's anti-colonial, anti-Western, anti-imperialist rhetoric appealed very much to Burhanuddin. And here, very clearly, you can trace the ideological genealogy going all the way back to Syed Sheikh al-Hadi and then earlier back to Munshi Abdullah. And what unites all of them is that these people, three successive generations of Kammuda reformists, were all part and parcel of what was really a colonial experiment, creating the Strait settlements that were basically an extension of the colonial state of India, which by extension was also an extension of the colonial state centered in London itself. Strait settlements where for the first time the idea of citizenship, where you would be a subject of colonial law and therefore protected by colonial law, actually gave space, opened a space for this sort of experimentation, which could never happen under the traditional rule of the Malay rulers in the Malay kingdoms. Till today, I think when we look at the state of Malaysian politics and the debates around Islam in Malaysia, we are still stuck caught between these two polarities. The universalist, cosmopolitan, inclusive